Okay, I think we'll kick things off. So hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Laurel Grodman. I'm Managing Director of Admissions at the Yale School of Management and also a proud member of the class of 2006 at Yale SOM. I am decked out in my Yale regalia today because today is actually a very important day here at Yale. It is the 137th Harvard-Yale game, which is a very, very big deal in these parts. And so I wanted to show my spirit today. Bula bula, hope we win. So I'm looking forward to spending the next half hour or so giving you a view into what the AdCom is looking for in your Yale SOM application and share some tips above and beyond what you would, I think, see navigating the application on your own, although I will point out there's a lot of good information in there as well. So as promised, I will literally take you into the Yale SOM application in just a little while so we can point out a couple of things in there that I think you'll find useful in navigating it. And then I'll also speak a little bit to a couple of components of the application that come after you hit submit, specifically the behavioral assessment, the video questions. If we have time, I'll get a little bit into the interview as well to give you a sense of that too. But before I open up my application and start walking through, I did want to talk a little bit at a high level about the philosophy and our approach to the application, because we do put a lot of time and thought into what we ask you to do. We know applying to business school is a big endeavor and is a labor-intensive exercise, and we want to make sure that we are approaching that as thoughtfully as you do. And so I'll step back and say, at a high level, we're really trying to assess three things in your application. We are trying to understand your academic preparedness for a rigorous MBA program. We want to make sure we're bringing people into the program who are set up to thrive and take full advantage of the curriculum. So we're looking for evidence of that academic preparedness. We are looking to get a sense of your professional impact and your ability to be both a leader and a collaborator in a professional setting. And so that's the second area that we're looking for. And third, we are looking for evidence that you'll be an involved participatory community member. So we're looking for the ways in which you've engaged in the organizations and communities that you've been a part of in the past. And really every aspect of our application ties back to one or more of those elements. And I'll try to point that out as we go through. I'll say, like I said, we do put a lot of thought into how we construct our application, and our guiding principle is really to only ask you questions that are relevant to evaluating your candidacy. And so as a result, I hope you'll find the experience of applying to Yale SOM is a streamlined one, and hopefully our application feels shorter than some of the other applications that you may be completing. We are, though, trying to get the fullest picture as possible of you. And so we collect information about you in a lot of different ways. We ask video questions, which is a format that we helped pioneer at Yale SOM as a way to build a more three-dimensional profile of your candidacy. We've also pioneered what we call our behavioral assessment, which helps gauge interpersonal and intrapersonal skills. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But we are really trying to get as full a picture of you as possible that goes beyond traditional metrics like grades and test scores, and really try to understand you as a candidate. But at the same time, we do try to approach that in a way that reduces bias as much as possible. So to the extent that we can gain information from you that's consistent across candidates and straightforward to evaluate, that is an important goal within our application process. And then lastly, we're committed to welcoming candidates along many, many different lines of diversity into the Yale SOM community. And so to that end, we have elements of the application that help us understand better the environmental aspects of your candidacy. We care about the distance that you've traveled and understanding your individual story. And so I'll point out some opportunities to help us get a better understanding of that story as well as we go through the application. I'll also note we continue to offer an application fee that is on a sliding scale based on your annual compensation as a way to be more accessible to a greater number of individuals. And generally speaking, our goal is to leverage new technologies and new ways of looking at candidates. And so some of the areas that you'll see are more recent additions to our application. Some have been there for a long time, but our goal is really to have a fair and consistent and accessible application experience that invites a wide diversity of applicants into the Yale SOM application process. So without further ado, if you give me just a moment, I am going to share my screen and we'll actually start looking inside the application itself. So give me just a moment here. And while I'm doing that, I will note I am joined by my colleague, Chris Mercury, behind the scenes. And so if something goes wildly off with my screen sharing, she will quickly let me know. But she's also there to support questions. Okay. All right, so hopefully everyone can now see this is the first page of our application. So hold on just a moment. All right, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time dwelling on the easy parts here, which is entering your biographical information, that kind of thing, but I will point out each page does have instructions, and we've been pretty thoughtful and directive in how to help you navigate sort of the nitty-gritty of filling out the various components of the application. So be sure to take a close look at those as you go through. But even more importantly, I'll point out, you'll see on many pages, you'll see these orange buttons that say video tips. And that is a video embedded in these pages from a member of the admissions team who's giving you a little bit more detail and insight into what we're looking for in each component of the application. So I definitely encourage you to leverage those video tips, as well as I'll point out we have an online application guide as well with even more insight into the various sections. So these are all resources that are available to you to be companions sort of side by side as you fill out the application. So I am going to jump to sort of the first section here where you're filling in information. And so again, this is sort of very straightforward. You're filling in your contact information. This is my test application, by the way. So you'll see there's a lot of information not filled out here, but I'm just trying to see if there's anything that makes sense to point out. I will say one thing that I'll note here is about anywhere between 10 and 15% of our MBA students at Yale SOM are actually pursuing a joint degree with another program at a graduate or professional school at Yale. So if that is something that you're interested in, you'll see there's a slew of different programs available to you. You'll want to note that within your application. They are two entirely separate application processes at SOM and whatever partner school you're considering. But we do want to know if that's something that you're interested in pursuing. And if you select one of these programs, you'll have an opportunity to enter a brief statement about your interest in pursuing a joint degree. So I'll just point that out here. Let's see. Scrolling back up, moving along, the next section, test scores. So one thing that I'm going to point out that's a little bit different in this year's application we introduced, we are using self-reported scores. So you are not required to submit an official test score to us prior to your application. We will ask for your official scores if you ultimately are admitted and enrolled, but we will accept your self-reported score. So we do ask that you enter every single one of the tests that you have taken, the GMAT or the GRE or both, but it is useful for us to see your entire testing history there. Okay, moving along, the next section, academic record. And as we think about sort of what all of what I mentioned at the beginning, kind of the three areas that we're looking to probe for, obviously test scores and academic record help us understand your academic preparedness. So we're looking to get a sense of your academic background. So within the academic record section, again, I'm not going to go through all these kind of specific instructions for how you're reporting your GPA. All of that is very clearly laid out. But I will mention over here, in addition to entering your academic institutions at any level at undergrad, or if you've done graduate level work, we also ask you to enter a couple of points of information about your quantitative background. And I mention this because I think this sometimes makes people nervous and think, oh, if I don't have coursework in these areas or most or any of these areas, I'm not going to be a viable candidate. And I do want to stress that we are not we don't require extensive or frankly any deep quantitative coursework as a requirement for coming into the MBA program, but the MBA program is quantitatively focused in aspects of it, certainly, and we do want to make sure that people are prepared. So it's very helpful for us to just get a sense of what your background is here, and we use this information to help us determine who we are going to invite to what we call Math Camp, which is a preparatory program that happens prior to the start of the SOM orientation that gives people who don't have as much quantitative background a little bit of exposure prior to coming into the program. So that's how we use that information. I'm going to scroll down a bit. One thing that I want to point out really quickly, we as most programs ask a couple of, I guess, disciplinary related questions. If you've ever been subject to academic discipline or discipline within the legal system. And I point this out because I know that this can sometimes be scary for those who have something that they need to highlight within these sections. And so I thought I'd share the fact that at Yale SOM, we actually don't see this information when we review your application. We know for a variety of reasons that disciplinary systems and circumstances are not necessarily what meets the eye and not necessarily evenly doled out to everyone. And so it takes a lot of kind of thought and rigor to understand the context of academic or legal discipline. So we actually take this out of our review process. We make our admissions decisions, and then a subcommittee that has consulted on best practices across the university and has really been thoughtful about how to review this kind of information. A subcommittee will review this information after admissions decisions have been made and understand if we have to do any follow-up or connect with others within the university. And so I thought that that was something that you might be interested in knowing, because I know that this section can be a little bit intimidating if you do have something to disclose. Just know that this is something that's kind of handled outside of the typical review process. Okay, moving on to work experience. The main thing that I will point out here is, well, I'll point out two things. So when you enter your work experience, we do ask you to identify if the organization that you're working for is a startup or a company that you started. I should probably not have this checked for Yale University, but for demonstrative purposes, if you are working for a startup or a smaller or a company that you started, we'll ask you to check this. In those cases, and more generally, if you're working for a smaller organization that you think we might not be as familiar with, it's extremely helpful for you to give us as much context as possible. So one tip that I have is within your resume, you may want to include just a brief line describing kind of the function and the main scope of your organization to give us on the admissions committee just a little bit better of a sense of what your organization is involved in, if it's not a major company that you're confident that we will have heard of. So that's just a small suggestion there. The other thing I want to point out in this section is this gap experience. So we do ask that if you've had a gap in your full-time employment post-undergrad of 3 months or more, other than if you were in graduate school, that you just give us a brief explanation of kind of the circumstances. The same goes for if you're applying while currently unemployed. We're certainly sensitive to the fact that during COVID, employment histories are different and may include more gaps than we might otherwise see. So it is not a bad thing to have a gap inherently, but it really helps us understand your trajectory if you can give us an explanation of any gaps that appear in your work history. Okay. So moving right along, post-MBA interests, do make sure to give some care and attention to this brief statement that we ask you about your post-MBA career interests. We're very careful in asking about your interests and not your goals. We know lots of people come to Yale SOM and change their mind once they've arrived and once they have an opportunity to explore a lot of different areas. But it is important for us to understand kind of your rationale and your interest in pursuing an MBA and how that's going to help you pursue the interests that you've presumably been building up over some time. And so here's your opportunity to tell us a little bit about that rationale and specifically what you've already been doing to position yourself to pursue those interests. That's valuable for us to know as well. Let's see. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about recommendations, but we do ask you for 2 professional recommendations, and this is the portal that you'll be able to use to solicit those recommendations from your recommenders. I will briefly open up activities. So again, thinking about, as we talked about work experience and post-MBA interests, those areas really ladder up to the question of your professional impact that I was discussing before. Activities may help us better understand that. It certainly helps us understand your potential involvement as a community member. And so we do ask you to identify your top 2 undergraduate and post-undergraduate activities that you'd like to focus on. And those are really where you've put the most kind of time and commitment into your activities. And those we define activities extremely broadly, and we understand that people have sort of the time and ability to participate in a variety of things. So that can be anything from volunteer work or sports or extracurriculars, volunteer work. It could also be involvement with your family. We understand that, again, what you do outside of work can take on a lot of different forms depending on your own personal circumstances. So think about that section as broadly as possible. I'm going to skip over the essay for now because we're going to talk about that in a little bit more depth in just a moment. Personal assessment, we ask you to identify from this list a few of the traits that you most closely identify with. That's fairly straightforward. I do want to just point out this section for a moment. As I mentioned before, we really are looking to understand, where you're coming from, what you bring to your application beyond just sort of the fill in the blank questions that we're asking. This section is entirely optional, but it can give us some sense of where you're coming from and how you identify in the circumstances that led up to where you are today. So we ask you some questions, again, all completely optional, about your background, about your family. Helps us understand, are you a first-generation college student? Have you been working to support your family income for a long time? That kind of the information that, again, can give us a fuller picture of where you're coming from. If there is kind of more that you want to tell us that doesn't fit within this section, you can do so in the optional information section, which I should have opened up the essay to show you. I will call out the optional information is just that, it is optional. So there is the required essay, which I'll talk about in just a few moments. If you are a reapplicant, there is a brief essay that we'll ask you to fill out to just tell us what has changed about your candidacy since your last application. And then there's this optional information, which is, like I said, it is optional. Most people will not need to fill it out. But if there is more detail you want to give us about your, let's say, your choice of recommenders, or if there is more context we need to better understand your undergraduate history, your academic performance, or if there is something about your personal background that you feel requires further explanation beyond what you fill out in the background information, that is all areas for the optional information section, which I encourage you to keep brief if you use it at all, but again, don't feel obligated to use that information. Okay, that was a super quick blast through the application, but hopefully gave you a little bit more insight into some of the sections and how we'll be using them. Again, they all sort of ladder up to those three areas of thinking about your academic potential, your professional impact, and your community engagement and involvement. I do want to, as I mentioned before, touch a little bit more upon the essay, because I think that's one very kind of unique aspect of the application. I also want to touch upon a couple of the things that happen after you hit submit. So I am going to, if you give me just a moment, stop sharing there and take you over here. All right, so I'm hoping you can see my PowerPoint screen now. Okay, so as I mentioned before, the essay. So essay is an area that, I encourage you, no matter what application you're filling out, be very, very careful to make sure that you are writing your essay specifically for what your school is asking. At SLM, we have a pretty unique essay prompt that we have been using, I think this is our 6th year now. And every year we think about, do we want to continue to use it? Are we getting what we want out of it? And I think it's been a very, very popular and effective essay within our admissions committee. We developed it in conjunction with organizational behavior professor Amy Brzezinski. And what we're asking you to do is describe the biggest commitment you have ever made. Your time in business school and the path that you take after that are significant commitments, and it's valuable for us to understand how you've previously approached a commitment of major importance in your life. And so we get a lot of questions about, well, what kind of commitment should I be writing about? Is it better to write about a professional or a personal one? Should it be something really specific or expansive? And what I can say is we read excellent essays on all of those topics. It's really less about the thing that you have committed to, because that's going to be highly personal to you and what you've chosen to put your time and talents towards. What we're most interested in is that approach towards the commitment. So you'll want to make sure that within that essay, you are detailed and specific about how you have approached that commitment over time, because that's what we're most interested in understanding, because it'll be informative about how you will approach commitments going forward. So that is a little bit more about the essay, and I of course encourage you to proofread, and make sure it's in great shape by the time it makes its way over to your application. Okay, the next area that I want to talk about, which is very unique to the LSOM application, is the behavioral assessment. So the behavioral assessment is one of these things that comes after you press submit on your application. You'll be prompted to complete 2 more things, neither of which is terribly time consuming, but just make sure you leave a little bit of time after you've hit submit. There's behavioral assessment and the video questions, which I'll come to next. So the behavioral assessment is a non-cognitive assessment. So unlike the GMAT or the GRE you take, which is a cognitive test, the behavioral assessment looks at non-cognitive abilities, so things like interpersonal and intrapersonal skills that are associated with business school success. Again, unlike the GMAT or GRE, you don't have to do any preparation, so all you need to do is sit down with a good internet connection and about 20 or 25 minutes to respond. And behavioral assessment itself, just to give you a sense of what the experience looks like, it will give you pairs of statements, and you'll have to pick the statement that feels more like you. So it might be, I like to go to meetings, or I'm a very organized person. And you pick the one that resonates more with you. And you'll get about 120 of these pairs that are tailored to your responses. And the feedback that I've gotten is, and I've taken the test myself, but I'm more curious to hear what our applicants have to say, is that some of them are really tough. You might get 2 statements, both of which seem a little bit negative, and you say, gosh, I don't really want to choose either of these. But what I can say is no one pair of statements is going to be determinative of your outcome here. It's adaptive. You'll keep getting more and more statements. And so the idea is to not think too much about any one of them. Move quickly through it, and don't fear that any one kind of set of statements here is going to make or break an application. By and large, we actually use the behavioral assessment with a somewhat light touch, but what it helps us do is better understand who will be able to actually perform academically in the MBA classroom. So we layer this on top of things like your GMAT or GRE score and your undergraduate performance. And what it actually allows us to do is have a little bit more confidence for applicants who may not present the strongest academic history, but exhibit a set of traits that we know are associated with success in the classroom. So again, we try to use this as something additive to your candidacy and helps us lean in for candidates who may not present the strongest academic history, but we nonetheless would love to have in the classroom. So that's a little bit about the behavioral assessment. I think it's actually a lot of fun to take, and one day we'd love to be able to pair this with results that we can share with you in the MBA classroom. We're not quite there yet, but that's the direction that we would love to be able to head. Okay, next up is the video questions. So real quick, video questions are the other component that come after your application is submitted. They are 3 questions that you'll receive. You will hear from one of the members of my team asking the question. For each of the questions, you'll get about 20 or 30 seconds to gather your thoughts, and then 60 to 90 seconds to record the response that you will deliver. And so a couple of points of advice here: just become familiar with what it feels like to give a 60 or 90-second response. Pick a behavioral question that you can find online, common job interview questions, and just time yourself. See what it feels like to speak for 60 or 90 seconds. Because it may surprise you how quickly or slowly it goes, depending on what you're expecting. You'll get a chance to practice with the tool. Frankly, now we are all so used to seeing ourselves on a Zoom screen that I think that this is a little bit more of a no-brainer than it might have been a few years ago. But you'll get a chance to practice with a specific tool that we use to record this. It's very user-friendly, and you'll get a sense of what it feels like to use it before you have to dive into the real questions. And then just make sure you have a good quiet internet connection, or sorry, a good internet connection, a quiet place. Make sure your cat's not walking across the screen, or your roommate, things like that, and you will be in good shape, I think, with the video questions. The reason we do the video questions, it's sort of 2 parts. It gives us a sense of how you articulate yourself on your feet, which is a great skill to have in an MBA classroom and in life in general. It also has allowed us to eliminate the English language testing requirements that you may see at other programs like the TOEFL or the IELTS if you're not a native speaker. So we do not require either of those exams. I know that I'm running up against time, so I am going to move real quickly through the interviews. I will say interviews are interview invitation, and interviews are given by invitation only. And so everyone who is admitted to the Yale School of Management will have an interview, but not everyone will necessarily be interviewed. Interviews are blind. So the person who interviews you, who was most likely a second-year student, will only have your resume. Our interviews are uniform, so everyone will be asked the same question. Like I said in the beginning, we are looking to compare people or to review people as fairly and consistently as possible. And so everyone will be receiving a uniform, consistent interview to make sure that experience is uniform and consistent. Have intelligent questions ready for your interviewer. Keep in mind your interviewer is most likely a second-year student, so take this as an opportunity to ask something that only a current student is going to be able to answer versus something that you could probably find in a variety of other formats. So I'm going to leave the interview at that. I think there's other opportunities for you to learn more about that experience as well. And what I want to close is, this is a lot of information packed into a small amount of time, but we have a lot of other opportunities for you to learn more about the application as well. I'll call out December 10th is our application tips panel, and that's an opportunity to hear from a number of my teammates who sit on the admissions committee to go into depth about more specific areas of the application, and there's an opportunity for you to ask your questions as part of that as well, and we'll answer questions live as part of that panel. We every week host admissions Q&A sessions, and these are entirely left up to what the attendees want to hear about. So if you have specific questions, especially leading up to the round 2 deadline, which I'll talk about in a moment, admissions Q&A sessions are great opportunities to get those questions answered. There is the online application guide that I mentioned, which again is full of more tips and advice on the specific aspects of the application. So I definitely encourage you to review that as well. And if you have a very specific question about your questions about how you're filling out your application or how you should approach a specific area that's just not quite clear on, you could always email us at mba.admissions@yale.edu. I'll note here, these are our application deadlines. So we are gearing up to release our round 1 decisions in a little, just over 2 weeks. Many of you may be considering round 2, for which the deadline is January 6th, and we'll release decisions in late March. And we also have a round 3, which the deadline is April 14th. And so again, I hope that you found today's session helpful in getting a little bit more insight to some of the specific areas of the application that might not be clear on the surface. But I definitely encourage you to participate in some of these other events and get to hear more from our team and get some of your specific questions answered. So thank you so much for joining today. Bula Bula, go Yale today, and I'm looking forward to reviewing many of your applications in the coming months. Thanks so much, and thank you, Chris.